Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Tim Clinton, Executive Director of the James Dobson Family Institute and President of the American Association of Christian Counselors. I wanted to take a moment to let you know that we here at the James Dobson Family Institute love you, and we're praying for you. If you're struggling and need some encouragement, we'd be honored to pray with you. You can call us toll-free at 877-732-6825. or simply go to drjamesdobson.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. James Dobson. This is Family Talk, a division of the James Dobson Family Institute. Today, we're going to continue to honor the life and legacy of Ravi Zacharias, and this is the fourth day of that series. I wish we could devote a whole month to this man and his words because they are that profound. But this message today is going to be highly relevant to young people who may be rushing into a commitment for marriage. I believe that even those in Christian circles often act prematurely and impulsively when they're making that decision. It's imperative that any young couple thinking about getting married listen to this program because of the gravity of the decision. To drive home this point, Ravi looked at the biblical account of Isaac and Rebekah's courtship and marriage. He highlighted a few principles to that story that every engaged and dating couple should hear. Here again is the voice of the late Ravi Zacharias. He went to be with the Lord several weeks ago, and we're going to let you hear another message on this edition of Family Talk.
Turn with me, please, to the book of Genesis, chapter 24, and my message is entitled, I, Isaac, Take You, Rebekah. I'll read for you verses 10 to 27 from Genesis chapter 24. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and left, taking with him all kinds of goods from his master. He set out for Aram Naharaim and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time the women go out to draw water. Then he prayed, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, give me success today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a girl, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, and she says, drink and I'll water your camels too, let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever lain with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, please give me a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, here it goes now, she said, I'll draw water for your camels too until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a beka and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She answered him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son that Milcah bore to Nahor. And she added, we have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night. Then the man bowed down and worshipped the Lord, saying, praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on to the journey to the house of my fathers and my master's relatives. Everything I say tonight hopefully will be worth believing and listening, except for the first 2 thoughts I want to leave with you, which are not worth believing. They may not even be worth listening to. But seeing there are many young people here, I'd like to share a little bit a couple of poems that I put together. Please don't bother memorizing them. They will do you no good. This is the way the first goes. As I said, neither of them are true. Love is like an onion. You taste it with delight, but when it's gone, you wonder whatever made you bite. Love is swell, it's so enticing, it's orange gel, it's strawberry icing, it's chocolate mousse, it's roasted goose, it's ham on rye, it's banana pie. Love is all good things without a question. In other words, it's indigestion. There's another one that goes this way. Slippery ice, very thin, pretty girl tumbles in, saw a boy on the bank, gave a shriek, then she sank. Boy on hand heard her shout, jumped right in, pulled her out. Now she's his, very nice, but she had to break the ice. That particular word love is probably one of the most used and most abused epithets that mankind has ever conceived in his mind. It has brought peace to many a heart, and the same word, misunderstood and abused, has broken many a life. And here in this first book of the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, which is our roots, it begins with the words, "In the beginning God," and ends with the words, "So Joseph died and was buried." I find that fascinating. It starts off with God and ends up with man in a coffin. But if you take those first few words, "In the beginning God," I think it is Dr. Billy Graham who once said, "I have no problem believing that the whale swallowed Jonah. I would have even believed it if Jonah had swallowed the whale." And here we've got a key narrative of the whole process of how Abraham worried about his entire generation to come, claiming the promise of God, called upon his trusted servant and said, "I want you to help me out in this. Would you pursue these instructions and find the woman whom my son Isaac should marry, this chosen seed?" Now, you and I will have difficulty living in the western part of the world to understand some of these concepts, but may I try to delineate for you that in principle, these hold true whether east or west. Certain infrastructures and patterns may change, but the principles necessarily abide. Here's what happens. He sends Eliezer and moves him in the direction so that he can go and find a bride for Isaac. And what I see emerging is something fascinating. Number one, Isaac was not the only one involved in this selection process, and I think that's pivotal. A trusted servant and a devoted father played a vital part in the selection of the bride. Now, you and I find that very difficult here. You see, when you begin dating and get involved in a romance here, we run into many dangerous settings where we get our hearts involved so quickly that our minds are not functioning anymore, and then we end up seeing our parents as interrupters of a relationship rather than as wise ones assisting us to seek the right one. Chances are, if you marry somebody in violation with your parents' will, I suggest you are playing a dangerous game with God. I just say this very plainly to you, young people. Be immensely careful when you make the pledge of your life to somebody if your parents are not in sympathy with it. Particularly so if your parents are men and women who love God. I want to give you an example of my older brother who is presently living in Paris, France. In the late 1960s, he came to my father one day. This is my older brother, 2 years older than me, and always Mr. Conservative. And he came to my father one day and said, "You know, Dad, I've always maintained it when we were in India and when I was here, that I'm only going to marry the girl you choose for me. And I guess I am ready now." And my father and mother said, "Fine, would you sit down and tell us the kind of girl you're looking for?" And he gave his biodata sketch and what he was looking for. And normally, the parents would go and travel around and look for somebody. But in this instance, he said, "Look, you really don't even need to do that. Why don't you just write to your sister in Bombay and let her do the hunting around, and we'll correspond back and forth and settle this minor issue." And so my father wrote to his sister, and she finally found the girl and wrote back. There were many letters coming with photographs and vita sheets and so forth. And finally, he zeroed in on this one person, and he'd read all about her every evening, finally started corresponding with her. Believe it or not, the engagement and the marriage was set with these two never having met. He flew out from Toronto with my father to go to Bombay. I began to get really concerned, and so finally, before he left, I said, I want to ask you just one question. I don't want to challenge anything you're doing. What are you going to do when you arrive in Bombay and you come down that jetway, that stairway there, and you see a girl standing there with a garland in her hand, and you say to yourself, good grief, I hope that's not her, I hope that's somebody else. Or she looks at you and says, I hope that's not him, I hope that's his brother. Whatever, what are you going to do? He said, are you through? I said, yep. He said, write it down and don't ever forget it. He said, love is as much a question of the will as it is of the emotion, and if you will to love somebody, you can. And the more I think of that statement, the more I think it has not been understood by you and me. You see, I was married in 1972, but 1 year before I was married, I was sitting in a theological class dealing with Christian education. I don't know what it had to do with the subject, but the professor said, I want you students to know that love is hard work. And I leaned over to my classmate and said, I don't like that categorization of love as hard work. I said, I wouldn't want to be married to anybody who goes around telling everybody how hard it is to love me. He said, yeah, I agree with you. Why don't you ask him? And like a fool I did. I stood up and I said, excuse me, sir. I said, I don't like your categorization of love as hard work. He says, Zacharias, are you married? I said, no. He said, then shut up and sit down. You don't know what you're talking about. 1 year later, I was married, and may I say unblushingly, he was right. It is hard work. You see, folks, the easiest part of our marriage was the wedding ceremony. I remember going in there early, and Margie, in right fashion from that day till now, has always been late. And she arrived there. I was standing at the front, and when I turned back to see her coming, it was one of the most ecstatic feelings the human heart could ever endure. There is no word in the English dictionary to describe it except probably the word wow. And she came up to the front, and your heart was in a flutter the whole time. So much so when the minister tells you to salute the bride out of sheer nervousness, you're on the verge of doing this. Went over for the dinner, the reception. It was grand. At the end of the reception, we went over to Niagara Falls, heading off to Cape Cod. I was thrilled to get up at 2 a.m. and get her a glass of water. But 5 years go by. And somebody has said rough sacrifice in America is when the electric blanket doesn't work. And you're lying there tucked in bed, and about 2 or 3, you hear the rustle of the sheets again. She's getting up, and the temptation is to cease to hear at that moment. For at least one reason, she looked different. You see, on that May 6, 1972, she looked grand, absolutely grand. But 5 years later, she had some funny things in her hair at night, which generally prompted one question: what stations are you able to get under that influence, you see? Somehow the first word that leaps to your mind is not the word wow. But you still love, because love is stronger than merely the flutter of a heart. If there's one example I have seen in my father-in-law, it is that constant gentlemanly nature that has reinforced this in my mind: the gentleness, the kindness, the affection, and the love. And all I'm saying to you, young people, is this: don't be deceived by merely the flutter of a heart. For love is an enormous commitment. A commitment that'll test you at some of your most vulnerable areas of spirituality. A commitment that'll force you to make choices between some very, very difficult issues that you will be faced with. And a commitment that'll force you to deal with your lust, with your greed, and with your pride, and every area of temptation that the Bible really talks about. It demands of you that quality of commitment which Jesus uses as an analogy in his relationship to us. Of all the analogies in this world, he takes the relationship of a bridegroom And of all of the categorizations of the church, he takes the loveliest of them all and calls us his bride, as he is the bridegroom. And if greater love has no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friend, it probably is more difficult to live a life of death than to just die in one moment. And that commitment is a constant dying to self and giving. It is hard work, and that's why, please hear me, when you come to that pivotal moment of decision, my suggestion to you is seek the advice of somebody you love and respect, and don't try to do it on your own just because you have the romantic feelings. Get the wisdom of your minister, the wisdom of your parents, the wisdom of friends, and realize that romance has to be transcended by a strong will and a degree of commitment to you. Secondly, not only was the will involved, in the process of selection, Rebekah emerges to me as a lovely woman in her kindness. And I want to go so far as to say there is never a reason to be unkind. There may be reasons to disagree. There may be reasons to struggle. After all, two wills are merging into one. There are constant compromises and surrenders, but there is never a reason to be unkind. I like what Chuck Swindoll says in one of his descriptions. It's a magnificent word. He talks about cherishing your partner. I don't know if Dr. Dobson addresses this, but I think if he does in this area, somebody once talked to me about it. I certainly believe he is correct in stating this. There are times in your relationship of husband and wife, and I really don't say this to be ridiculous or funny, but a woman's mind being what it is, there are times she will actually look at you and say to you, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling very, very unhappy, and I really can't even tell you what the reason is. All I know is that I want to be loved. There are times when no amount of talk is what she's looking for, possibly just the putting of the arm around and that of comfort. And I've had people come into the counseling room and say this to me, that he somehow thinks I'm looking for a long speech or a long explanation or some kind of a propositional solution to the situation. She says, I don't know what's wrong. I don't know why it is wrong. I only want to know that he loves me and that he cares for me. It's that kind of kindness, I think, that is able to walk the second mile. I think Jesus pinpointed this in a different relationship very powerfully. And at one point, one of the men came up to Jesus and said something like this, could you please tell me, there is a law in our land once that if a Roman soldier comes to me and asks me to carry his heavy arms and ammunition for him, that I as a Jew by law am to walk with him 1 mile and carry this weight for him. Jesus, you are so strong in your wisdom. Can you tell me the next time he comes and asks me, just by virtue of being a Jew, having his right over me, to carry his arms and ammunition, what should I do to him? They were really looking for a kind of a punch in the nose answer. Jesus looked and said, the next time he comes and asks you to walk with him 1 mile, at the end of the 1 mile, pause and look into his eyes and say to him, sir, would you mind if I carry it the second also? And the counter perspective of Jesus Christ constantly kept crippling his questioners, because he moved love to its deepest recesses, the very recesses of the heart. You see, let me give you a little humor here again. I don't know who wrote it in the United States, but there's an unwritten law in the country that says it is always the responsibility of the man of the house to carry the garbage out. Isn't that true, men? I don't know where this idea was born, but wherever you go, it's always the man who's carrying the garbage out. And when I lived in Chicago, going to Trinity, the garbage dump was about 50 yards away from where we lived. And Chicago can get pretty windy and icy. And it didn't matter what the hour was. Every time I went out, my wife would always come to wish me goodbye at the door, which was fine. She'd always come with a bag of garbage. And generally, the eggshells would be carefully placed right on the top. So what do you think, on a Sunday morning, I'm going out, maybe driving 200 miles to preach. What do? Grab the garbage bag and say, here, give it to me. And go over to the garbage dump and jam it into the drums while the cats and dogs are pouncing all over the place. get into the car and slam the door and start the engine and squeal the tires and pull out of there, pull into the church parking lot, get the praise the Lord syndrome hurriedly on you, stand behind the pulpit and say, isn't it wonderful to be serving the Lord so willingly? Oh, no. You take the garbage bag very gently so you don't hurt either her or the garbage. Take it as you slide across that miserable ice, probably whistling everything is beautiful in its own way. Put it into the drum very casually. End of mile 1. And then you go back and knock on the door and make sure she doesn't get a coronary now. And say, honey, I still have 10 minutes to go. Would you mind if I helped you with the dishes before I left? Love suffers long and is kind, and the Bible says to provoke one another to good works. Young people, this is the moment in your life, please hear me, when he who is wooing you will be at his kindest. And if you do not see that kindness in that person, watch out. For that partnership will be nourished and nurtured on the basis of a love that is not arrogant, but a love that is kind. The selection by an authority other than just himself, the kindness of the person that was being selected, and thirdly, and very pivotally, it says she was pure, she was a virgin, neither had she lain with any man. The reason for that is the Hebrew word for virgin there does not mean biological virginity. It can also be translated a young maiden, but just so that you and I are sure, because it could mean virginity, he punctuates it and says she was a young maiden and was one who had not lain with any man, clearly describing her as a woman who had treated her body as the temple of the living God. That is one of the greatest gifts you can give to your partner. That you have respected this body, that you have treated it with all the purity, in spite of all of the surroundings of temptation. You have learned to honor this body as a temple that God has given to you. Please listen now. When Moses went to the top of Sinai, he was given detailed directions of how to build the tabernacle. So long and no longer, so wide and no wider, so high and no higher, such and such a color, so many curtain rods, so many curtain rings, such and such a shape, such dimensions. Nobody is to touch such and such except so-and-so and so-and-so of the tribe of so-and-so. Everything was meticulously, precisely, in a detailed way given. And just in case Moses missed it, it was repeated in the book of Exodus again. The whole dimension is repeated, and I'll tell you why. There are few words sandwiched in the book of Exodus that miss us when we study it. He says, Moses, when you have finished building this tabernacle, exactly as I have told you, there I will meet with you. Now, when you and I build a church, we don't go to Mount Sinai, do we? But I'll tell you where church is now. When we come to the church now, we don't come to the sanctuary, we bring our sanctuaries with us. I firmly believe that in this mortal body, God meets with me. And if I prostitute this, if I squander it in illegitimate, adulterous, vile relationships, if I have wasted away the mandates of God for this body, He cannot meet with me here, for God cannot look upon sin in comfort.
It's such a powerful point to end this classic Family Talk broadcast today. I'm Roger Marsh, and you've been listening to the familiar voice of the late Ravi Zacharias. I hope you learned something from the first half of his meaningful message. It was delivered to a group of college students many years ago, but it's still very applicable even today. Hope you'll be sure to tune in again tomorrow for the conclusion of Ravi's wise words on marriage, purity, and commitment. In the meantime, be sure to visit our broadcast page at drjamesdobson.org to learn more about Ravi Zacharias' life, legacy, and ministry. You can also request a CD copy of this entire message when you go to drjamesdobson.org. That way you can listen to any of our broadcasts anytime, no matter where you are. We encourage you to request a copy of any of the programs highlighted this week celebrating Ravi Zacharias. The Order a CD button can be found on today's broadcast page at drjamesdobson.org. Now, before we leave the air for today, have you signed up for Dr. Dobson's newsletter yet? Every month, Dr. Dobson takes time to write about an issue that affects the institution of the family, and this latest publication focuses on the essential topic of biblical masculinity. Now, you'll want to read what Dr. Dobson had to say, especially with Father's Day just around the corner. So request your copy of this newest newsletter today by going to drjamesdobson.org. That's drjamesdobson.org. Or by calling 877-732-6825. That's 877-732-6825. And be sure to tune in again tomorrow for the conclusion of this riveting presentation featuring the wisdom of the late Ravi Zacharias. That's coming your way on the next edition of Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk.
This has been a presentation of the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute.